In this video, I'd like to study Chapter 9 in Book 1 of Aristotle's Ethics. Chapter 9 in Book 1. Let's read the chapter together, and I'll make a few notes that I trust will be helpful as you make your first reading through this chapter and get ready to study Chapter 9 in Aristotle's Ethics for Mastery. Let's read it together, Chapter 9 of Book 1. It is also doubted whether felicity is a thing which may be acquired by discipline or by custom or in some other way by exercise, or whether it exceeds by a certain divine allotment or from fortune. So is felicity something that's within human power to attain and maintain, or is happiness merely the result of good fortune, divine favor or good luck? If any other thing is the gift of gods to men, it is reasonable to suppose that felicity is the gift of divinity, and especially because it is the best of human concerns. If there was to be anything which gods would be thought to give to men, wouldn't it be felicity? That's the greatest gift of all. This, however, will perhaps be more adapted to another discussion. But it appears that though it should not be sent by divinity to men, but is procured or obtained through virtue and a certain discipline or exercise, it belongs to the most divine of things. For the reward and end of virtue appears to be most excellent, and something divine and blessed. Felicity also will be a thing very common, for it is able to be present through a certain discipline and attention to all men who are not mutilated with respect to virtue. But if it is better that felicity should be acquired after this manner rather than from fortune or luck, it is reasonable that it should be so acquired, since natural productions subsist in such a way as it is most beautiful for them to subsist. And in a similar manner, things which are produced by art or by any other cause, and especially such as are produced by the most excellent cause. To commit, however, the greatest and most beautiful of things to fortune would be very lawless and reprehensible. The object of investigation, likewise, is apparent from the definition of felicity, for we have said that felicity is a certain energy of the soul according to virtue. But of the remaining goods, some indeed are present from necessity, but others cooperate and are naturally adapted to be useful organically. These things also will accord with what we have said in the beginning. For we established the end of the political science as the best end, but this pays the greatest attention to the citizens, in order to render them characters of a certain description, and that they may be good men and practicers of beautiful actions. Reasonably, therefore, do we neither call an ox, nor a horse, nor any other irrational animal happy in this sense. For it is not possible that any one of them can partake of such an energy as this. Through this cause, likewise, neither is a child called happy, for he is not yet, on account of his age, a practicer of things of this kind. Those children who are said to be happy are proclaimed to be blessed through hope, that when they become men, they will obtain the rational energy in perfection. For felicity, as we have said, requires perfect virtue and a perfect life. For many mutations and all various fortunes happen in life, and it is possible that he whose affairs are in the most prosperous condition may in old age fall into the greatest calamities. As in heroic poems it is fabled concerning Priam, the king of Troy. But no one would call him happy who experiences such misfortunes and who dies miserably. So in chapter 9, Aristotle takes up the question of whether felicity is something that we should consider to be a gift from the gods, or a gift of God, something given as a gift, not earned through discipline, but something simply received, something therefore not in our control. He says that it should not be considered such, but happiness is a reward for a perfect life, a virtuous life. Happiness is a reward. There's not too much to comment on in this chapter. It's pretty simple, I think, simple enough for students to work through on their own, but there are a few points at the end that I'd like to comment on as a Christian reader. It's important to note that Aristotle says a child cannot be considered happy. A child cannot be considered happy. And this agrees with our Catholic teaching. Think about the fact that we say that children are born and they do not yet possess an active faculty of reason. We say that normally this comes to them around the age of 7 or 8, which coincides with their reception of the sacraments of first penance and communion. And we see that children are not able to act according to reason. And since they're not able to act according to reason, they're not able to act according to virtue. And therefore, since they're not able to act virtuously because they don't possess reason, they are not able to enjoy this true felicity. So that idea that children may not be called happy actually makes sense and agrees with Catholic teaching on children in the age of reason and so on. I hope that's clear. The second thing that's interesting is he says, when we do call children happy, they are proclaimed to be blessed through hope that when they become men, they will obtain rational energy in perfection. So when we consider a child and say that it is happy, what we're really saying is that we believe that this child has a hope of enjoying this happiness in the future. And I think this is very significant in light of the Catholic faith, because it's this hope which leads us to baptize infants. We baptize these infants because we consider them to be blessed. And when we consider why is it that we consider such a child to be blessed? It's because we know that the child is born into a Catholic family where it's going to be taught the way of Christ, where it's going to be loved by its Christian parents, where it's going to be raised in the sacramental life of the church, where it's going to be taught by divine revelation and so on. And we consider a Catholic child to be happy and blessed, not in its current state, but we consider it to be happy with regard to the hope that we have that child will grow to enjoy that true felicity which is available to us through the Christian faith and through true wisdom. So what Aristotle says there about calling children happy with a sort of hope of future happiness makes perfect sense in light of the Catholic faith and practice with the sacrament of baptism. Now, one thing I want to note is that we often judge children prematurely. We look at children as they grow up, and we find that some children have bad habits, do bad things, get themselves into trouble, make decisions that cost them significant opportunities in life that they can never have again. And we often judge children and begin to call them unhappy and miserable and so on because they make bad decisions and go through bad consequences of their sins and errors. We have to remember that this idea of happiness really has more to do with our end than any point along the way. A man dies happy who dies well, and a happy man who experiences misfortunes later in life actually dies unhappily in misery. And so it's better to be a bad child who amends his way later in life and ends in happiness than to be a good child, apparently happy, who, while under the care of his parents, does what is good, like the child I mentioned before who eats his vegetables under compulsion. It's better to be a bad child who turns good than to be a good child who turns bad. And so we need to refrain from judging children, but realize that God works in our lives, and many of us go through different experiences that affect us. And just because a child may not be making good choices, may not be living virtuously at a certain point, doesn't mean that he's going to end unhappy. And we always have to consider that hope and avoid judging others, remembering that all that matters is that one ends happy. And we need to persevere always in that hope, praying, doing our part to set a good example, to teach, to encourage, to forgive, and so on. And remember all the stories in Scripture of bad men made good. Think of the story of the prodigal son, where that son is lost in sin, miserable in the world, and yet comes to his senses, returns home, and lives happily ever after. Jesus presents that parable to us as normal human experience. So let's not allow ourselves to get too concerned when we see a child making bad choices. Remember that children in the early years don't even possess reason in an active sense, and can't be expected to act reasonably. They also lack experience and can't be expected to understand and appreciate the commands or advice of those who speak from experience. And we also need to be aware of hypocrisy, remembering that when we were young, when we adults were young, we also made the same mistakes and learned the same lessons, and it didn't kill us. And we need to finally remember Jesus' words where he says, "Those who are forgiven much are those who love much." So, as Aristotle reminds us, we call a child happy or blessed through hope that we have for that child. As we work in education, as we study, as you grow up as a child and go through hard times, don't forget that there's always hope. Hope for a happy end. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.